Is public education in America dead? Um, it seems that we have a lot of talk about the public education system lately. The Trump campaign has floated the idea. Trump has talked openly of getting rid of the Department of Education, and we have a lot of disagreements that come to schools. There was once upon a time when there was a narrative about schools in America um, that they were that it was a comfortable place, but I don't know that we're there anymore. And there's been a lot of actually I don't know how long that actually existed because even with the advent of Catholic immigrants, there, private or public schools has long been a contentious issue for us here in the United States, these United States. So, Rusty, you brought up education earlier today, and I thought it might be good for us to broach this topic. Um,
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting topic to talk about, especially in modern day America. My grandma was a retired English teacher, and she taught, back in the 50s and 60s. And back when she was teaching, it was a lot different of a school system than we have nowadays. And the way that I see the school system nowadays is I don't really see that they're really teaching the American students more about history and more about education, as they are more just trying to assimilate them into their own beliefs or what they believe society should be. We send our kids to these schools for 12 years of their, beginning life when they're learning everything and growing as people. And they come out when we send them to these schools, a lot of people nowadays, they send them to these schools and they kind of forget about it. And they think, oh, the school is going to be a safe place. And America has so much extra schooling going on. I mean, you can send them to regular school, then you can send them to night school, then you can send them to summer school if they still need it, and you can almost send them to school and for the entire time that the entire year that the student is there. And I just think that we're putting too much emphasis into the schooling system. They're not really putting too much of an output. And from what I've seen, I don't have kids myself. My brother has three of them, and I've seen the schooling system through their eyes, and it's a lot different from 20 years ago when I was in school. And then when we talk about the American schooling system, we can start looking at schooling system around the world and how is it different. Back in the day, America used to be considered a really smart country. People used to come from all over the world to come to American colleges to learn their education, and they would go back to their countries. And I don't know if that's so much the case anymore when you have places like Japan and other countries, China, India. There's multiple countries that are just outright defeating Americans and the dominance of education nowadays.
there's a couple of things I find interesting in that. In one way, it's interesting how we rely people who may or may not agree on how tightly woven the social safety net should be in America. One way to get around that, should there be public babysitting, is a reliance on schooling. And there was we live in the last couple of decades in a world in which we see very few single parent households, or I'm sorry, not single parent households, but stay at home, one parent staying at home and one person working. And I think we were all probably part of the generation in which that world dissipated. Maybe that was uh, the Leave It to Beaver era of school that I was thinking about when we opened up the episode. But that's long gone away, and so school has changed to fill in a niche in America in that regards. And I think as we've relied on school for for babysitting, that it's changed in our expectations of what school offers. Not only that, but schools are they're a good way to inject money into a local economy. Private or public infrastructure projects and school bonds. I'm quite amazed at how many incredibly nice school buildings and wide curriculums are available for students today. And I also see concerns about the quality of an education that is happening, but I think there's something larger going on in that regard, and that is a change in the American economy. When we live in a world of debt that's piling up, and we are sending dollars out through all the world to take advantage of cheaper production in other countries. I think a lot of kids look at what their job options are coming out of school, and it's not necessarily the same for what our parents saw in the 60s and 70s, and what we saw leading into the 90s and even the early 2000s. So, I think that's part of it. We also have seen a massive rise in the cost of college. I think there's also some unreal expectations as to, well, what kind of education we're going to get in college, and gets to who gets to participate in that. It's interesting to see, say, Republicans talking points with regards to what to do with regards to school. Get rid of the Department of Education, whereas the Biden administration, the Democrats, talk about canceling student debt and keeping kids in school longer. There's also there's we get different things from school. Like, in one hand, I hear the concerns about the quality of education, and and I think about the dialogue with regards to, test results, teaching the test, collapsing math, math and science levels in our schools. But schools are also where we are, get where we go to be around, learn to get along with other kids. Like, it is a socialization. There is an aspect of socialization to it. When I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere, and I enjoyed school, and I did probably better in school than I might otherwise have done, because I enjoyed going to school. Why? Because my option was boredom. Um, for the when summer came, I got to go to town on the 4th of July, which also maybe gave rise to a little bit of patriotism. Um, so I always wanted to go to school, and I remember that there were kids who did not want to go to school, and usually they lived in town, and school meant school wasn't a paradigm shifting from boredom to being around your friends. They were already around their friends, but all of a sudden they had to be around their friends under somebody else's eye. So there's a lot going on there in schools. There's also this, when we think about the socialization aspect of school, or what's being taught there. There's a certain amount of um, of morality that is inherent in socialization and even the educational aspects of school. And again, like, it's interesting to track the Catholic movement for private schools, and now we see a more diverse options for private schooling, than just Catholic private schools, that our parents and maybe our generation saw. We see all these charter schools now and math and science focused schools, et cetera, et cetera. But um, we've got all of those aspects that are tumbling around. Part of what brought this to our attention was a a disagreement or a rally in Edmond, Oklahoma, um, that that was over a kid flying a flag on his truck at school, and it's that gets into where do you draw the line between patriotism and freedom of expression here in the United States?
Well, I mean, it just draws the line between what does the school really embellish and allow. I mean, during Pride Month, there's pride flags everywhere on almost all the schools in all the country in all the states. There, it was floated around, but you can't show an American flag.
Well, and but we that's an assumption because I would imagine that it's exactly that question that a school in remember this is in Oklahoma. A school in Oklahoma is probably trying to avoid. So, um, you know, the, I would guess that they should have erred on the side of letting the kids do whatever the hell they want. I mean, when I was in school, I never could understand why we had dress codes and we had to cut our hair. Um, and when I was told that someday we were going to go out into the real world and and uh, and the things that we were learning in school were going to have more of an impact there, I always rejected that argument. And um, I didn't understand why I couldn't have facial hair in school. I was able to grow a full beard, and and maybe I was a little bit lazy and didn't want to shave. Um, that could have been the reason why they wanted us to shave, but I didn't think it was fair that other kids had to. And now that I have very little hair left, I certainly wish that I could have had my long hippie hair um, while I was in school. And I'm sometimes shocked that my nieces and nephews, the kids I know in our little school, still have to go through some of those moral decisions made by a public school. And even with regards to clothes, I find it interesting that so many of our tests about freedom of expression seem to dissipate whenever it gets to a school, and it's generally the more conservative. Um, this is where you get to see a distinction between conservative and liberal viewpoints. So,
Yeah, but I mean, you can see it in different schools in different parts of the country. But I mean, I know I'm more for the conservative, like, you know, I really don't think that kids should be dressing up as furries and cats going around school licking people, thinking that, you gotta agree with them or you're the person that's wrong. And that's the other side of the argument.
I'm laughing because I didn't even know the furry movement was a thing until again, I'm in a very small town, and I found I there was a rumor that there was a furry in our little tiny school of 150. So, but I have to wonder as to what that expression is. I mean, it's- how different was the Breakfast Club from? I mean, maybe the Breakfast Club of today has a furry in it, wouldn't you say?
I wouldn't say it does, but I mean, if I guess there could be some sections of the population where that would be welcomed in, and that just gets to your own personal beliefs, and I don't think that certain things should be pressed upon kids at such a young age when they don't know right from wrong, left from right. I mean, they in 2 years they're going to completely change their minds. I don't think that at that young of an age they should be able to make those kind of permanent decisions and be having those kind of ideas thrust upon them. I'm more of along the lines of, hey, let's go over to where Japan is teaching the kids, the first years of their education is mostly just about napping and how to respect people in society, and not really kind of assimilating them into a society where you're pushing off your own beliefs.
Well, the Breakfast Club was a bunch of delinquents that were in detention, right? So
Yes.
there probably would be a furry in there.
And I mean, I also I love John Hughes, by the way. I think about I don't know. There's a whole lot of film tropes in kids in school. Um, there's also this. I have to think about I don't know, delinquents in detention. I think so much more of what school is actually about is the socialization aspect, because the part of the narrative that we hear so often in school is that kids need to learn, and I would agree, but how hard is it to learn things? um and not only that, but we live in a world where we have given great access to troves and troves and troves of knowledge. So when I see kids, and I myself, when I want to learn something, I go to YouTube, or I go to the internet, I go to Wikipedia. And there was a time whenever you had to go to your teacher at school, but now I can go to the internet and I can find a professor from MIT or Harvard or the University of Chicago, experts in a field.
I think that's partially because you have a baseline understanding of is
You're rubber banding a bit, Grant. You still there?
Yeah, I lost Grant also. I can't really hear him if he's still talking, Lucas. But that, that was making me think a lot along the points of, what's the real difference between school and jail or prison then, if it's just all about socialization? I mean, we just send people to jail for a certain period of time to re-socialize and tell them how to get better. And we're doing the same thing to the kids. We're sending them to a certain place, tell them how to re-socialize for a certain period of time, and that that they got the food that was almost the same. That the look of the schools are sometimes the same. They don't have fences around them, or guards, but if you look at the layout between a prison system and a school, it's eerily similar. And I think we did just lose Grant.
He'll be back. Um, I think, I mean, great point, and this is why I'm also against truancy laws. I think and why I think we also should be thinking about schools more in the in not just private schools, but correlated to religions, because there is so much there is so much moral fabric and an understanding of the world that a school must impart. And Grant, when we lost him, said that part of the reason that I get away with going to YouTube and seeking out the dispensers of knowledge that I want is because I had a broad underpinning. But I would say that came from a religious understanding of the world to begin with. And when I see, because I would agree that I see kids who are confused, spinning their wheels, uncertain of their value or their place in the world, and and I worry about, where do they make a decision as to how they want to um, bring value to the world later in their lives. If you don't understand, if you're not given that understanding of your relationship to other humans, then it's really hard to I don't know, think about. I mean, think about what you want to bring via working, or what you want to do for the rest of your life. Um,
And I do see that aspect, and I don't know if it's really being accomplished in schools. And that was another thing I was going to kind of bring up is, we send our kids to these schools for such a long period of their time, and then we tell them that, okay, I remember when I was growing up in school, everybody always told me, oh, the real life is different. The real world is different. You don't understand. And, I didn't understand. And I went from straight to school. I went straight into the Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps taught me a whole different set of features, a whole different set of values, a whole different set of priorities. And they were not the same as the American, working class. They weren't the same as everybody living in America. And when I came out of the Marine Corps, I still wasn't prepared for American society. And that's something I had to adapt into even later on. And welcome back, Grant. I'm so glad to see we got you back here.
Yeah, no worries. Sorry about that.
So Rusty, I think that's very interesting too, because not only do and and Grant, we were talking about kids who probably maybe are spinning their wheels or unaware of um, what value that they're going to bring to humanity when they leave school, and in some ways, in using school for a babysitting class, we have forgotten that, and we told ourselves a narrative about I don't know, um, humanism and science, and that these things don't come from a philosophy or a religion. Um, so and I think about that when I see kids like also just shuttled from high school directly into college these days. Like I was not prepared. I thought I was well prepared to go to college, but I went to college and changed my major a couple of times. And not only that, but my focus was elsewhere, and I probably played the game pretty well. But if I could go back to college now, or if I could have say when I was 30 years old, I would have had a much different experience, been much more focused on learning, um, and I think I would have had a better time. And I see kids left and right who are shuttled from high school directly to college. They don't take a gap year. They don't travel, um, and they don't join the military. I had a social my social studies teacher. It feels strange. I feel anxious to say that word. My social studies teacher in high school, Rusty, um, had a long career in the military, and I remember he once told me that he thought that military service should be required for all students. And I disagreed with him vehemently then, and I think that I would agree with him now. Only I would also throw in AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, um, and did you guys know that we also I think selective service has been or registration for the draft is I don't know. That's a different subject altogether. But Rusty, when you came out of the military, like what was your experience then in I don't know in integrating into working America?
Well, I tried to do the whole, okay, now I'm in the military. I have this thing called the GI Bill. Let's go ahead and try college now. And like I said, I wasn't any more prepared for college coming out of high school as I was coming out of the Marines. And when I got into college, I did a lot like a lot of these people do, as you were saying, when they get shuttled straight into college. It's during a lot of the formative years where everything's opening up to the world. Right as you get ready to graduate from high school, you turn 18 and you're now becoming an adult. And right as soon as you join into college, your first few years in, you just getting settled in, you become a sophomore, junior, you become 21 and you're allowed to drink, and everybody in your area is now becoming 21 so they can buy the alcohol. So those people that were under 21, they're getting a large amount of alcohol, just through the buy process and through easy accessibility. And it's not so much penalized as it is, encouraged and endorsed, kind of like the Marine Corps was. You look at movies like Animal House and you think of what is the college life, but to go get drunk and have fun with your friends in the dorms. And that was one of the things that really caught me off guard about the Marine Corps, was how much they embellished and allowed alcohol in the Marines. I was in the Marine Corps infantry. And even when I was 18 years old, 19 years old, just coming out of boot camp, one of the first things they did is they lined us up on what they call the catwalk, which is basically like an outside deck from the apartment buildings or units that we lived in. And they lined us up across the catwalk, and they put a a case of beer between every two people, and they made us shotgun the beer until one person puked. It didn't matter what your age was compared to the other person. It didn't matter anything. You shotgun the beer until one person puked. Luckily for me, I wasn't the one that puked first, and so I got to take the rest of the case and go back to my unit and just enjoy the night. Whereas the guy that ended up puking got penalized for the next, hour and a half, 2 hours because he couldn't hold his liquor as well as me at 18 years old. And, it was just embellished and pushed on us to drink so much almost every night. It was allowed in the Marine Corps. It was almost expected that my average idea of what was going to happen is I was going to get drunk at night, wake up in the morning, go for a run and puke it out. And I don't know how many times I did that. And that was my normal, schedule of occurrence. And I had such a bad drinking problem coming out of the Marine Corps. I really don't get into it anymore, but it was really bad and insane. There was points when I was in Japan that I would drink up to 45 shots of alcohol in a single night. I would finish a single bottle, 750 milliliters of alcohol by myself, like it was nothing. I would be going into 2, 3 bottles in a single day. Talk about people in the blood alcohol level of getting above 4.0%, and how that's, blood poisoning or alcohol poisoning. I never actually went to a hospital for alcohol poisoning, but I've been alcohol poisoned multiple times in my life due to my excessive drinking. When I was in Japan, my roommate was a Navy. I know you're trying to speak, and real quick, Lucas, just want to get this one more point across. When I was in Japan, my roommate was a Navy doc, and he would used to hook me up to IVs at night when I would get too drunk to help me get back in the state of groove for the next morning, because that's how bad I was. And it was almost, it wasn't penalized in the Marine Corps. They didn't do anything negative about it. They more or less endorsed it and gave us, more nights of encouragement, like mess nights, where they encouraged you to drink. And that was the whole theme of the event.
Well, going back to the socialization of being around people you're unfamiliar with, I have a, as you're telling that story, I wonder, are you still friends with the guys that you drank with whenever you entered the Marine Corps?
Yeah, I mean, I still have friends from the Marines, and it's not, we all had our various extents of drinking and incidents that happened afterwards. You know, when I was in Minnesota after the Marine Corps and trying to assimilate myself into normal society with that kind of a drinking problem and trying to continue that drinking lifestyle in Minnesota. I'd go out to the bars 5 or 6 times a night. In Minnesota, I lived right near the Twin Cities. You don't really want to admit to it, but the Twin Cities is an area where there's a lot of, small communities and small towns around. And a lot of the bars in those small towns, they compete with different drinking, you know, um, specials during the weekend. And I remember there was this one small bar that we used to go to where they had a drink special called Any Coin, Any Drink, except for a penny. And basically what that means, you can go with anything as low as a nickel and you could get a shot or a beer for a nickel. And they had that special for like 2 hours. You can go get any shot or any beer for as low as a nickel. She'd go there with a quarter and you can get 5 shots and just get completely drunk within the first 2 hours. And then the special's over. And in most people's mind, well, they're going on to the next thing. So they go to the next place. And how do you get to the next place? Well, you end up driving with your friends to get there because it's the next town over or it's 20 or 25 miles away.
Oh, I'm laughing. I was in Costa Rica when they passed their first traffic laws, and I was at a coffee shop in the morning, and Tico was reading. Actually, everybody was leaning over the newspaper, reading the newspaper. I walked in to get my coffee. Guy looks at me and he said, "We can't drive when we're drunk. How are we going to get home?" But I so I think college is also there's a lot more to college than going to class. You only go to class a couple of hours, but when kids and it's too bad we're talking about education now that all these graduated seniors have already made their decisions. But for God forbid, also any high schoolers are listening to us. But when when I talk to high school students today, and for some reason some parents ask me to tell their kids they need to go to a Division 1 research and university, etc. And I say no. I think it's important to go to school where you want to live, because so much of and when I say that I was successful in school, sure, I learned a little bit, but I also made a lot of contacts, and I played dominoes and I played cards, and I was constantly in the bars. I wasn't necessarily there to be getting drunk, and I had a but again, I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere, so I always wanted to be amongst a crowd of people, and I enjoyed playing games. But that played very well for me coming out of college, because I knew so many people from so many areas. But sadly, then I moved to different states, and I lost a lot of those contacts. But I never stopped learning. Grant, what about you? Rusty and I are going on about some of our concerns. You studied math. What was your school experience like?
Well, a few things. I threw something on the screen because you had mentioned teaching to the test. So, what I've experienced in school recently is that they have these adaptive tests now. So, when we used to talk about teaching to the test or whatever, but now the computer administers a test, and the point of the test is to try to find where the student knows things and then also the boundary for their knowledge. So it's an adaptive test that tries to have the student get 50% of the problems wrong and then scores based on that. So it's different now because we have these computer adaptive tests, and this isn't necessarily nationwide, but in a lot of schools, this is how it's done these days. Um, I think recapping a few things that also were said, is when we talk about kids wearing uniforms and expressing their individuality, I've seen the opposite of this. Like, there's a strong desire amongst a lot of students to conform, not because they have this imposed upon them, but they impose it upon themselves. So you'll see where people will dress very similarly as a matter of choice. Like, they'll almost impose a uniform if there isn't a uniform, and I see that very ubiquitously at a lot of different schools because I've had had to bounce around between a bunch of different schools, and it's pretty common that the students will self-select for a style of dress that everybody just gravitates towards, and then that's what you wear. And whether that's a uniform or whether it's the what happens at the school, that level of individuality doesn't occur until I think a bit later when you start to find your footing. And I think that's partially what a public school education is giving students, is like a baseline for how to approach the world. It's learning how to read, it's learning math. I mean, these are the elementary school sort of activities. And those baseline activities, sure, you could learn it off of a computer, but children don't really have the attention span to sit down and learn a subject that is difficult and maybe not necessarily fun, right? Like, if you were to sit a 5-year-old in front of a computer and say, "Here, learn off of YouTube," they're probably going to learn about a cartoon character or like how to color or something, maybe, but they're not going to learn something that is baseline hard. And I've seen some posts recently about talking about learning on the internet and that it should be difficult and that there should be some amount of acquisition of knowledge that's feels like a job or feels like a chore, because that's part of what the acquisition of knowledge is it's a process of internalizing something through a difficult means, and then on the other side of it you have something that you didn't have before, and that is by necessity somewhat difficult. So this idea that we could just have kids learn from a computer or from the AI, I think, is maybe a bit naive about the way that children actually behave and children react, because a lot of what we're talking about right now is high school to college, and that's like well beyond, I think, what is even the requirement for public school education. Like, you don't have to graduate from high school. It's less than that, or at least I'm pretty sure it's still less than that. So this stuff that we're talking about is really going towards young adulthood in the acquisition of knowledge. And so is it really required to sort of get a high school education or a college education? I think that's where a lot of people are really starting to push back. The college experience is a lot more about getting access to industry. It's about getting access to peers. It's about building a social group that is going to help launch you into a more professional world than it is the acquisition of knowledge. Because at the point where you're gotten through your middle school education, you at that point probably have most of the tools available to you to acquire whatever kind of knowledge you want. And so when we're talking about YouTube and all of this, ways that you can acquire knowledge post middle school, I think that that's really into the adult learning area. And so I think there is this distinction between early childhood education, preschool, elementary school, middle school, and then there's this hard cutoff sort of as soon as you go into high school, because at that point, I think you probably have the tools at your disposal to learn what you want to learn if you had the breadth of experience and exposure to the types of knowledge that exist in the world and what you might be interested in.
Well, I think for early younger kids and early school, I think that we should understand, I don't know, the significance of tying that school to a religious code, and also how it's important. When it gets older, I both think, I guess I think a lot about these days how expensive college is. The it's been part. There was tuition deregulation in what the mid 2000s, and that has, we have seen the costs of college explode since then. Like, I'm can't believe it when I hear how much school started, or how much it cost. But it's also amazing to me that is now so much, there is so much knowledge that is available through the internet, and not just conspiracy theories or crazy people. Dr. Brommer's label, like, reposted on some personal website, but you can get on, you can get on YouTube and go take the MIT classes for learning Lisp. Um, you can listen to some of the greatest economists that are teaching in the best schools today, but it costs money to walk away from there with a diploma that says you're part of that club. So I don't know. I think that they get lumped into the same paradigm, and I think that also brings undue anxiety to kids. I mean, they should understand that early on they're going to school to have a good time, um, to learn some degree of emotional control, and to learn what's different, and what they share with their peers, learn how to express themselves, whether that be in a uniform or in denim jeans and cut off shirt. Um, but I don't know. I see that all gets lumped so much together, and not only that, but I don't understand why we also have this narrative today that the moment that you finish one level of school, you immediately have to go into the next. Like, I really don't understand why people don't take 4 or 5 years off to work or to travel or um, to have different experiences before they head into college.
I think part of that early childhood education, there's a value to this being provided as a public good, because I think that there's a lot to having the patience to teach children information. It's until you've tried to sit down and teach, a 6 or 7 year old something, you rapidly realize that your skill sets and your patience level may not be suitable to the task. They're a different type of creature than an adult or even a young adult. A young adult has an ability to concentrate and an ability to focus and listen. A child has a different level of maturity and ability to sit there and do something. And so your ability to deliver a message or to teach them something is not necessarily up to the task. And just because you're an adult or you're a parent also doesn't mean you're necessarily equipped to be a teacher. Like that's its own skill set. And so I'd say we still need to make a pretty strong distinction between what we're really talking about here. Because if we're talking about into young adulthood, I think there's a level of ability to relate what after you're an adult, like to relate even to a young adult. And you'll see this if you interact with people who are just entering the workforce. And Rusty, I think in the Marine Corps, you probably mostly are this. Like there's a lot of young men, and your experiences here. This is early, in the phase of being an adult is usually when the military takes new recruits. They're taking them at that first phase, right when they're entering adulthood. And so I just think that there is still probably a strong place for this centralized or even public good education, because there's just not an equal distribution of the skill set that's needed to take kids from knowing nothing to being somewhat ready to be a young adult.
Well, when there's as I think about that too, and I feel like that, and this is not backed up with data, but I feel like that homeschooling has become more popular. Before COVID, maybe even more so after COVID. Do you think parents tell themselves? Do you think that parents are like well equipped to be able to educate children like that, or um, is it better to find a teacher who has a gift for it?
I think a lot of times the homeschooling is happening in small tribal situations. I mean, it can certainly happen where it's just like a nuclear family. The mom or the dad takes on the role of being the educator within a homeschool sort of a situation. But I think in my experience, what I've seen a lot of the times, you start to somewhat recreate this public good thing, but on a smaller level, because you have maybe many families. And I think homeschooling is very popular amongst Christians. Like that's a very popular place where homeschooling occurs in America. And I think that when that occurs, you've got this congregation, or you have a church, and then you have multiple different families that are doing this. And so you have some amount of cross pollination, or you have some amount of they're doing this in a somewhat tribal or congregational setting. And so it tends to look towards what that public good looks like anyway. It's just now self-selecting for the type of student's background and educational information that's being presented. And so if that's what we're achieving through what we call homeschooling, which is this somewhat tribal private education where you're self-selecting for the criteria, I think there are some schools that even do that sort of a thing when they start to track students. So it really depends on the type of public school education that you're getting, and it requires you to be a bit more plugged in, because there's definitely not this homogenous public school system, right? It's even very different amongst districts, because districts have their own ability from the superintendent on down to make a lot of decisions about how they're going to run their school system. So it's not even homogenous within the United States. I think it's pretty disparate, actually. And even in a place like where I live in the state of Minnesota, like it's wildly disparate amongst the various different districts and superintendents and how they're running things. So I'd say with homeschooling, it's hit and miss whether you're really getting a good education, because it all depends upon how much effort is being put into it by the one who's primarily delivering the educational content. That person who's fulfilling the role of educator.
We mentioned yesterday Clement Vallandigham and uh, uh, the man without a country back in a northerner who did not support Lincoln's war policies and was exiled from the country. He's interesting because it's some of his ideas that created the public education system that we have today. And the public education system really got started, as you were mentioning, our school districts. They got started by the Homestead Act, and the Homestead Act um, set aside sections of land to be devoted to funding public education, and so there were school lands and taxing districts that were created for school districts, um, and I think that was a fairly decent system, but there are other problems that we see today with regards to the funding of school. Anytime you put an institution in the hands of government, it likes to feed itself, and I think that that's part of the problem. But when I think about also your comment with regards to religion, and I've said over and over that I see so much of, especially early education, tied to moral guidance. So I wonder if, and I think too about where does public education go in the wake of the Republican, whatever they want to call it. But Donald Trump has certainly said he wants to get rid of the Department of Education. Maybe in his mind, he's returning to giving power to these local school districts. But it would seem to me that that Americans wanted progress in their school system, and that school district, as the Homestead Acts laid it out, wasn't enough. Perhaps they need to be moving more in a direction of um, of tying early schools, especially to religious communities. So,
But this concept of an independent school district, it really means that there's not a lot of generalization that you can do across these different ISDs. And as you start to understand that better, or as you start to move between them, you can see how disparate the requirements, the way that things are run, and the type of education that's prioritized is handled. And so, even in my home state of Minnesota, I see this pretty strikingly, as like Minneapolis public school district versus the outlying school districts, the level of funding, the emphasis on what they're teaching, the amount of homework that's given, whether they track students by, ability, the access to accelerated curricula. There's all kinds of really, really different things. And so when we talk about public school in America, I think the thing you got to remember, it is very much dependent on which school district you're in. And when you have stuff like open enrollment and you have the ability to move between school districts, now that requires a certain level of affluence, because if you're going to open enroll to a different school, it's your job to get them there, which requires you to do your own transportation, and you've got to be able to get your student to the right spot at the right time. So there's a certain amount of you know choice that you have, but it's within reason and it's within reach of how much cash you've actually got and what your relative level of affluence is. But I think it's hard to just make a lot of strong generalizations about like what it means to even have public schooling in America, because each of these districts is so different. It has different levels of funding. They have different levels of what they present to the students and athletics and all kinds of stuff. It's so different between the different districts. I just it's hard for me to think about this as a homogenous thing when it comes down so much to like how each of these different districts is being run.
Well, in the state of Texas, I'm not sure what year it was, late 80s or early 90s, they passed a law called what they call the Robin Hood Act. And that took all of the funding from the independent school districts and pooled it at the state level to be redistributed to all of the school districts according to their population of citizens. Um, and in Colorado, the the education system is supplemented by the lotto, and I think that happened in 1984, and then in what 2011 or 12, Colorado added legalized the sale of cannabis, marijuana, and part of the sin tax on marijuana goes to funding education also. Um, so I don't know, which gets it like interesting how the states gain control of the curricula for for the school districts in their state. I think it's better to I mean I don't know, the Robin Hood plan gives gave problems in Texas because whereas local landowners were in had a greater interest in what the cost of schooling was. They were um, they didn't spend as much on education, but now, especially with the way that the Robin Hood plan is set up, if a school district has extra money, they're going to spend it rather than save it for the future or, God forbid, return it to taxpayers. So yeah, education is um, it's it brings up a lot of, I don't know, political conflict um, because it is a public interest. It's not that it's not like we all go home, go to our little fiefdoms of land and pretend like we have no contact with our neighbors. So um, anyway, I think that we will see. I think that the Republicans are um, no nobody believed Donald Trump was going to repeal Roe versus Wade going into his last presidency, and if anyone thinks that they're just banging on a cymbal right now when they talk about getting rid of the Department of Education, the federal plans for education, I think they are going to do it, and it's going to become more of a fraught issue at the state levels. So I don't know if we'll see more states adopt things like the Robin Hood plan. I'm assuming that Minnesota, because the way that you were describing the Minnesota system, I'm assuming that the local school districts still are isolated from each other and fund themselves.
That's correct. They do not have a Robin Hood plan. There's nothing like this.
And do you guys have a lot of charter schools or private schools?
Both,
How are they accommodated? No.
both. There's a tremendous amount of private and charter schools in the state of Minnesota, and the
Hmm,
charter schools are directly in competition with the public schools.
interesting. Um, and do charter or public schools or charter or private schools get any public funding for the number of students that they have?
The charter schools do for sure. I don't think the private schools do.
Hmm. Well,
The private schools are entirely funded, I think, through the tuition paid by the students that attend. But the charter schools, they get an equivalent amount of money that the public school would get. So a public school gets a certain amount of money per each student, so long as the student is there a sufficient amount of days. So like if they miss too many days, then they don't get that funding. So the schools are very strict about attendance and making sure that they're there, because if they don't show up the correct amount of days, then they lose the funding for the entire year for that student. And then there's also more money given to a school that takes an open enrolled student than a student that's within the district. So if you can attract students to your district through open enrollment, then they're worth more than in district students.
You know, in New Mexico, they just passed a law that is taking the schools from 4 days a week to mandatory 5 days a week. Do you guys have 4 day a week or 5 day a week schooling there?
It's a certain number of days that they have to be in education, and it's up to the school district to set the specific days that they want them there. So there's a certain amount of in-service days for teachers, and then they also get to set their own holiday schedule. So a charter school can say, we're not going to do Christmas. We're going to do some other type of holiday that's, our charter schools days off. And so it's really up to each school district to set their calendar. The number of days that they're going to attend is required, but other than that, they have a lot of flexibility in the way that they actually achieve it.
You know, I find that, well, in Colorado and New Mexico, both, or and I think it began in Colorado initially, especially with all of their mountain schools, harder travel, more inclement weather. Um, I always thought it interesting that I was a kid. I wanted to go to Colorado because I knew that they had 4 day school weeks, and I thought it'd be more fun to have 3 day weekends. Um, and it's interesting to me that like in the case of New Mexico, they've moved to the 5 day school week. I think that has everything to do um, with there being a lot of single parent families or in two parent families, both of the parents working, and parents or there being concerns about kids being home alone for for a work day, Friday. Um, so I don't. Well, I also think that we might see. I've long thought this, and COVID it kind of happened for a little bit, but then we seem to have gone back to clocking in every day of the week for 9 to 5. But I've wondered if we would see um, greater variability in what working hours are. We have actually seen that change a lot in our lifetimes. Um, but I think it's interesting that a 4 day work week, you don't run your buses on Friday. You don't have to heat and cool a building for 3 days out of the week instead of 4 days out of the week. It's interesting that New Mexico, which also does not have wonderful I don't know, education. They don't they are they I hear a lot that they are lagging in their educational parameters. But I don't know what spending money. I don't know what good spending money does on school. I think it has so much more to do with what the economic what the jobs are available to kids when they get out of school, and I think that we grind that axe at the level of school rather than and throw more money at it rather than fixing problems in what jobs are available out once people get out of school. Anyway, um, well, I don't know that I have much more to say about education. It will be it'll be I'm interested to see what the Republicans do with regards to how they want to structure public education going forward. I don't know if you remember in Trump's last administration, but Betsy DeVos was was his head of or secretary of education, and she leaned a lot towards charter and private schools. So it seems like they're going to go much more in that direction. Betsy DeVos, by the way, you know who her brother is?
I don't.
Eric Prince, Blackwater.
Ah,
Yeah. Um, and I think that they started Avon. I think they got their money from Avon.
interesting.
Um, So yeah.
All right. Well, great discussion today, guys. We'll talk more tomorrow.
All right. Ciao.